Please welcome former U.S. Ambassador and Arizona Senator Jeff Flake and Atlantic contributor Evan Smith.
Good evening. Thank you so much, Ambassador Flake, for being here.
Great to be here.
So happy to have you. Great to be in Arizona. Let me say to all of you what you heard with our first session. We're going to have time for questions at the end. So Ambassador Flake and I will talk about the state of the world for about 30 minutes. We may need 300 minutes to talk about the state of the world.
Thanks for starting this quickly so nobody could leave.
That's right.
That's what I appreciate.
And then we're going to come to you with questions at the end. Ambassador, I thought, just given the state of things today, we talk about Venezuela first. 10 days ago, the U.S., as you know, launched military strikes in Venezuela and captured and incarcerated the president, I should say the leader of a sovereign nation, and his wife. The president, right after that, called this one of the most stunning and powerful displays of American military might in American history. Critics said it was a violation of international law. Critics of the critics said, what is even international law? It doesn't exist. Where do you come down on this?
Well, you start with the easy ones, don't you?
Yeah. It's going to only get harder from here. That's right.
No, I think going in and taking Maduro, still on the Chavez thing, taking Maduro out, this was a law enforcement action, and I think it was justified. He was a fugitive from justice. He'd been indicted in U.S. courts. So that's not what I have issue with. And I think it did show the power of the U.S. military. It's significant. It's overwhelming. Now we're going to see the limits of power and the limits of the U.S. running a country. And President Trump was not shy to say, we are running the country. And he said it several times since. People in back of him, Marco Rubio and others, are, I think, looking around saying, what do we do now? But I've seen administrations far more experienced than this one fail when they try to run a country. And so I do question where we're going with this now, and especially, thank you, especially the fact that the president has seemed to ignore now the woman who won the last presidential election and pivoted to, well, let's go there and take the oil and bolster the economy that way, and we'll get the revenue and decide where to spend it. That, to the rest of the world, smacks of U.S. imperialism, of days that we'd rather forget. And so I do worry about where we're going now, but the initial action to go get Maduro, I think, was justified.
So the question has turned to whether the war powers of Congress, whether that needs to be applied to limit the president's ability to do this. You know that 5 Republicans joined Democrats on a procedural vote that's essentially a proxy for a vote that would tie the president's hands on this. If you were still a Republican member of the United States Senate, which you were for 6 years, would you have voted with them to limit the president's war powers?
Bet.
You would have.
I've been very...
Even though you support what we did.
Sure, sure. And the War Powers Act, remember, the War Powers Act allows the president to take action if he believes that there's an imminent threat, in this case, a law enforcement action, and then Congress has to act.
Right.
And there's a clock ticking for Congress to act, and then a clock ticking for the president to have to come back and justify the action. And if it's not justified and he doesn't get a vote, then funding stops and he can't go forward. So that's the way the War Powers Act is supposed to happen, and that's the way it should. Now, let me just say, I spent 6 years in the Senate trying to reform, we haven't, the War Powers Act really hasn't taken effect for years and years and years. We've had what's been called an authorization for use of military force. And so myself and Tim Kaine on the Democratic side, Republican and Democrat, sponsored legislation to rein that AUMF in and to basically make it so we weren't operating, in exercises or operations around the world based on an AUMF that was meant for Afghanistan. And so Congress still needs to move forward. There are some individuals on the Republican side and the Democratic side who would like to reform that process.
Right. So, of course, now comes Greenland, we think. President has told us, one of the good things about this president is he tells us every day what he intends to do. We could not be caught off guard by this president because he tells us all the time. Katie Miller, the wife of Stephen Miller, the president's aide, put on Twitter after the attack on Venezuela a picture of Greenland with the map, the flag of the United States, pardon me, superimposed on it, and it said "soon" above it. What is going to become of NATO?
Yeah.
If we do this, and if Greenland is next, maybe Cuba is after that, what are we going to do about this?
Well, in this case, Greenland is really run by Denmark, which is a member of NATO. You would have, Article 5 of NATO says that, an attack on one is an attack on all, and everyone defends us. And the president says, well, NATO has never done anything for us. The Article 5 power has only been invoked once in the past 70 years. When? After we were attacked on 9/11. And who came to our aid? All of the NATO
Everybody
members.
else. That's
Everyone
right.
else. I was just in Turkey for 3 years. They were there for us. Throughout that entire time we were there. I was on Capitol Hill at 9/11 and saw the next day ambassadors from those countries, our NATO allies, saying, we're standing with you. And they did. They sent their own troops to Afghanistan, many of whom lost their lives in defense of the United States. So our NATO allies have done a lot for us. And that has been the most successful military alliance the world has ever seen. And to toy with it like this and to say that we're going to not take off the table military action against a member of NATO, that's just
So will that spell the end of NATO? I mean, I'm remembering that in the first Trump term, he was no big fan of NATO at that point either. This is not a change from the first time. This is this plus, plus, plus. If we do take some action to seize Greenland, will it mean the end of NATO?
Well, if we took action to do that, yes, it probably would.
Right.
I don't think that's going to happen. I really don't. I mean, already Marco Rubio saying, no, he means we're just going to buy it. Great, buy it. Try to get the funding from Congress on that one. I mean,
Plus, I don't think Denmark is selling. That's the other problem. Right.
We have a military base,
Right.
on Greenland. So it's just, I don't know what to make of it. I don't think it's serious, but it is.
Right.
It's just one more thing that makes our allies question where we are. And if we need anything today, it's allies. If we're going to compete with China and confront China where we should on a number of issues, we'd better have our allies with us. And I tell you, that's what is just really concerning about where we are. And I know that a lot of my former Republican colleagues in the Senate share my view. They support NATO. And so I don't think, one, the president will go that far, and two, I think that they will stand in the breach, hopefully, as they have 5 of them defying the president on this. And I wrote a piece a while ago called The Great GOP Migration Has Begun. And you're starting to see it, slowly but surely.
Slowly.
It's not a stampede by any means, but...
well, the reason that this war powers vote is notable is it has been the exception that has proved the rule in this administration, which is that this Congress does not push back.
Right. And that's been very frustrating to see. The Senate has always jealously guarded its prerogative, whether that's on domestic policy, spending, or appropriations, or certainly foreign policy. And to see the Senate just so supine, basically, and to lay back and let everything happen, it just it's unbelievable to me.
Failing to recognize, to remember that one of its chief jobs is to hold the executive branch accountable. You gave a speech in California about 3 weeks ago in which you said, I thought it was remarkable, and I wrote it down, democracy does not need perfect leaders, it needs accountable leaders. Right. We cannot have accountability without Congress checking the power of the executive branch, full stop. Right?
Yeah, and the nice thing is, being overseas for a while, you learn that world leaders don't just look at what the U.S. president says, they watch what the Congress does as well.
Right. Or does
in
not
particular,
do.
Yeah, in particular the Senate, because they know senators have 6-year terms. President only has a 4-year term. Even if a president has 8 years, most senators are there for far longer. They pay attention, and so for the Congress to be so silent on these things. Now, let me just say, as a senator, as a member of the House, you can't talk and opine on everything the president says. You'd be doing that all day. But there are certain things, like talking about invading Greenland, where you stand up and say, not on my watch.
Or in the case of this week, again, the exception that proves the rule, a criminal investigation of Jerome Powell, the chair of the Federal Reserve Board, where much of the Republican Senate, which has been quiet for the last, a year or so, has suddenly now found its spine.
Well, certainly, and that's a little self-interest as well. They know that the reason this economy is kept going as it is, despite tariffs and inflation and whatever else, is because of the confidence that world markets see in Jerome Powell. And so if he were to be taken out, or if you saw the Fed just beholden to whatever president happens to be in, then we would not do well on the world markets.
Right. Let me take you back overseas to Iran. There have been quite extraordinary protests against the ruling government in Iran, and there have been quite extraordinary tragedies around the treatment of the protesters, the number of deaths of people who've been protesting the government. On the low end, they've said it's about 2,000. CBS News has a story today that estimates it could be as much as 12,000 or even 20,000 anti-government protesters in Iran who've been killed. The president is flirting with military attacks in Iran. He's been briefed on options. He said to favor military attacks. For the moment, what he said is, we're going to implement 25% tariffs against trading partners of Iran. What is our place in this conversation? Where should we be in this conversation?
Well, it's difficult in terms militarily. Our options are limited because we have placed a number of our assets in the Caribbean and don't have them available if we were to take some action there. So militarily, we are limited. I think diplomatically and on sanctions, yes, we ought to continue to apply pressure. And this does seem different than other uprisings there. And I certainly hope that it maintains, but I do hope that we don't have to get involved, because once we do, then Iran, like any country, there's a nationalistic feeling. They may not like their leaders, but they don't want somebody else telling them what to do.
And they especially don't want us telling them what to do, right?
Precisely. And so, I mean, to go after countries that are dealing or trading with Iran when they shouldn't be, some of them are already under sanction, do that, sure. But I hope we can hold off.
Of course, I'm remembering during the campaign, we were not going to do any more regime change. We were not going to do any more interventions in forever wars. I mean, it does seem like we're in the upside down here.
Yeah, it does. I'm not a fan of isolationism. I'm not a fan of the way that the president campaigned as America first. I do think that's usually America last. We've done very well under this system that has been in effect that we were the architects of after World War II.
Right.
Whether it's security alliances like NATO or trade agreements that have really bolstered the economies around the world, but I just reject the notion that we have somehow come out on the short end of the stick or people have taken advantage of us. We have done very well under that system. And so I hope that we recognize that and can move forward with it.
If you go back 6 months, Ambassador Flake, we would not have been talking about Venezuela. We would not have been talking about Iran. We'd be talking about Ukraine and Russia. We'd be talking about Israel and Gaza. What happened to those guys? Like, they're totally off stage. We don't talk about Ukraine and Russia hardly at all. I kind of forgot that there was even an Israel and Gaza, to the point that I Googled it this morning. I was like, wasn't there a ceasefire, I thought? And here was a headline from yesterday's New York Times. 2 months after ceasefire, Israel is still demolishing Gaza. Demolished more than 2,500 buildings, destroying tunnels, booby-trapping homes. So much for that. Are we still paying attention to that stuff? Should we still be? Is there an interest in us paying attention to that stuff?
Well, those are stories until the next bigger story comes along.
And pushes them off the front page, right? It's a fire hose of news at all times.
But I can tell you, looking at Ukraine and Russia and what's going on there, we better pay attention to that one, because that means a lot.
And we should not waver in our support of Ukraine.
No, absolutely not. That's another one when you stick with your allies, and when you anytime where the French are exhibiting more spine than you are, then you ought to reassess where you are.
Good one.
And
that's a pretty good one.
And when you're schooled by some of these European leaders who we've always
Right.
We've always downplayed it as feckless and whatever else, and they're the ones saying, stand up.
Right.
And especially, in the area, the world that I was in, I mean, we beg, borrow, and plead with our allies like Turkey to, invoke the Montreux Convention to keep Russian warships out of the Black Sea, to help us with sanctions against Russia. And then all of a sudden we turn and say, well, Putin, he's not such a bad guy, and and our allies are left here. What do we do? What do we do here? So it's really, this is a real Rorschach test as to where we are. Do we stand for freedom and democracy, or do we let a country like Russia impose its will and change borders by force? That's what this international system that has worked so well and has been enforced by NATO, that has done well, and we can't abandon that. There will be some kind of ceasefire at some point. Russia will still be in those territories that it has taken, but we shouldn't recognize that legally, and we should find a way to do it, whether you call it an armistice or whatever else, but you do not give Russia gain by simply imposing its will and invading a sovereign neighbor.
Do you have a theory of what's... Do you have a theory of what's going on with Trump and Putin? Can you explain this? I mean, this has been one of the great mysteries, at least to me. It's of course, a thousand conspiracy theories born of the way that the president's behaved toward this guy. But do you have any idea what's going on here?
It's puzzling, other than he likes a strong man. And that's what he sees in Putin. And he sees Putin able to impose his will. The Duma doesn't push back very much. And I think that is something that the president would like here.
So he's kind of the president's spirit animal or something?
Yeah,
Life coach?
I don't know, but when I was still in the Senate, that debacle in Helsinki, which was the worst display of foreign policy I can remember, where the president stood at a podium next to Putin and said, he tells me there was no election interference, and I believe him.
I believe him.
Why wouldn't I?
Right.
And not believing his own intelligence services, who clearly said there was. I was in Helsinki the next week after that, and it was just unbelievable. And then I went to Riga in Latvia and see our allies there that are having to deal with Russia at their door, when they have 60% of their population are Russian speaking and get their news from Russia. And then they always relied on the West and the U.S., and then to see us back off is just unfortunate.
But of course, the president's one thing, but your former colleagues, or at least some of whom were your former colleagues in the Senate, members of the Senate, there are a bunch of people who have backslid on Ukraine.
Yeah, I'm heartened by the fact that there is a bill right now to impose further sanctions on Russia, really tough sanctions on Russia, that has 85 co-sponsors.
Right.
That's a bipartisan bill. That would overcome a presidential veto. 85. Now, I wish they would insist on that and just take the senatorial prerogative and pass the legislation and force the president to veto it.
Yeah.
But they haven't done that. And but I'm heartened that that's still where the Senate is. And as we go through the next several months, particularly after the midterm, any president in his second term after the midterms is a lame duck. And you have fewer Republicans fearing what the president can do to them electorally. Because right now, until now, the president has been able to pick any primary in the country, a Republican primary, and dictate the winner. That's right. The bottom line. And virtually all of my Republican colleagues know that. With the exception of Lisa Murkowski, they have a different primary system there, and a different electoral system. I wish we could adopt that elsewhere.
And not surprisingly, she was very proudly one of those who voted for the War Powers Resolution and said today, yeah, he wants me to change my vote. There's not going to be any way I'm going to change my vote.
Right.
That's right. So Israel and Gaza. Is Netanyahu a good person for us to be standing with?
We should have applied a lot more pressure to him than we did.
Yeah.
And we should still be. There is a doctrine called proportionality in war. And I was right next door for most of that in a 97% Muslim country. And watching how they react to what was going on there was a different matter. Now, I'm a huge supporter of Israel. It is our most important ally. I hope we'll continue to support them. And it was a terrorist action that started this whole thing, perpetrated by Hamas. But then moving forward, you've got to recognize that we've got to have a long-term viable solution that endures. And that involves some kind of proportionality, and I hope we get there.
Can you tell me what the last scene in the movie is on this one? Because I can't see it.
No, that escapes me as well. I've always subscribed to what has been kind of the bipartisan consensus on foreign policy, that there's a two-state solution there somewhere. That's tough to see now. It's tough to see.
Given everything that's happened over the last year plus.
That's right. That's right. And
Right.
Hamas has nobody but themselves to blame on this. And so I hope that we can get something enduring here.
So there are threats abroad and there are threats at home. I want to talk about the border and immigration and ICE, given the events of the last week. The murder of Renee Good, and honestly, that's like 4 extraordinary ICE incidents ago at this point. There was one today where a woman was driving on a street to try to go to her doctor and I guess got crosswise with ICE agents in Minnesota, again Minnesota. And there's video online that you can Google today, I don't suggest you do it, of her being, having the windows of her car smashed in. They pull her out of her driver's seat through the window, cut her seatbelt, drag her along and arrest her. Apparently overnight, last night, 6 senior leaders of the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department resigned over the failure of the Justice Department to investigate the Renee Good shooting. Is there any defense, whatever you think about the immigration issue or the issue of undocumented immigration, is there any defense for what we're seeing from ICE?
When you have enforcement actions like this, you're going to have some, you call it rogue, call it outside of the mainstream, you're going to have some events like this happen. What needs to happen when that happens is for the administration to recognize we need to investigate this. And you can't immediately say, like our Secretary of Homeland Security said, this was fully justified. And speak as if nobody had watched the video.
You saw the video.
Oh, yeah.
Was it fully justified?
It's tough to see justification, particularly for the second and third shot. I mean, right through a side window. So, but for the administration to say, you know, we don't need to investigate this. We know it was.
And by the way, we need to keep the Minnesota authorities out of investigating it themselves.
Right.
Right.
But I mean, I think it's just like the boat strikes. You know, when people heard after a while, we took out a defenseless boat, or people who were trying to survive on an overturned boat. I actually wrote a piece for The Atlantic on this and likened it to a century ago, Henry Stanley of Stanley and Livingston, I presume, a British parliamentarian who was an explorer, and he went through Africa to rescue the Emir of Equatoria, a British subject. And he went through the entire continent, and along the way just survived, he and his 300-member entourage, by holding up the village elders or others and killing them if they didn't get their food, and just basically raping and pillaging all the way through Africa. And then he got home and wrote his memoir, and his exploits had always done well. And by this time, the European population, European sensibilities had kicked in. And most of them said, ooh, you know, you did this? Was what you did justified by all this killing? And the public turned against it. And Henry Stanley, who was a great politician, great explorer, had his whole reputation after that time tarnished significantly because the people had just said, ooh. And I think you're at that point here where everyone wants rapists and others to be taken out of the country and criminals to be taken out and sent back where they came from and not allowed to come in the country again. But to go as we are right now, neighborhood by neighborhood, and doing this, I think most Americans are finally saying, ooh,
Well, again, go back to the campaign when we were told this was going to be about criminal migrants. It's now about U.S. citizens. It is U.S. citizens who are being targeted. I mean, I heard you say rogue earlier, Ambassador, and I want to take you at your word that you say rogue. At what point does the magnitude of incidents go from rogue to systemic?
Well, it does if the administration continues to say any action is justified. And I just think the tide is turning on this one. Now let's put it in context as well. With immigration, the Biden administration failed miserably in terms of securing the border. They should have seen this coming. You can't have an asylum policy that basically, for all intents and purposes, says, come here, green neon light showing, you can get asylum. And that has led to a lot of the problems we have now, but that does still not justify inhumane treatment. And also, too many U.S. citizens are being caught up in this or are fearful that they will be.
Let's talk about the president, please.
I thought we have been.
No, well, no, I want to talk specifically about him. I don't want to talk around him. My colleague at The Atlantic, Jonathan Lemire, has a really great piece online today about the president, and he tweeted about it this morning, and this is what he said, characterizing the piece. Even for Donald Trump, it's been quite the week. Venezuela, Greenland, ICE, Powell, Iran, and more. Trump, though never restrained, is now pure id, acting on impulse and goaded on by advisors who see an opportunity to further expand executive power. Does that sound right to you? I mean, this president has demonstrated a thirst for executive power that I, in my lifetime, have not seen before.
Well, I think that it's, self-evident. We can stipulate that because he's said so just in the last week. He said the only thing that should limit me is my, well, nothing should limit me, I guess. So yeah, it's been remarkable, put it that way. But I do think, like I said, the migration has begun, and if it's for self-interest on the part of some in Congress, seeing midterms coming up, knowing that the president can certainly dictate your primary, but he can't win your general. And so you're going to have some people on the Republican side say, I've got to part with the president on some of this. And then, like I said, and then the court could come in as well. I'm hoping that the court comes in on tariffs in particular. That should be an easy one for the court.
Well, so that actually gets me to this question, not just of Congress, which we've already talked about as an ineffective pushback or check, but in fact, so many institutions that exist for the purpose of being guardrails in a moment like this have failed us. The courts have failed us. Congress has failed us. I'm sorry, the media has failed us. Like, we have really not done a very good job of being in the guardrail business in this country. And I just wonder, you're optimistic about this migration occurring. I actually am concerned that we're letting more and more time pass. It's going to be very hard to put Humpty Dumpty back together.
I would say one of the institutions that has not failed us is the judiciary. There have been a couple of decisions that I have certainly disagreed with. The second one on Trump power.
You're talking about Supreme Court.
Yes, Supreme Court. Yeah. Supreme Court and some of the lower appellate courts as well. You've seen, take President Trump's election challenges in the last time. 79 challenges, no wins or one partial win.
One partial win.
Yeah, so I'm not as skeptical as some are about the judiciary. The media, that's been troublesome as well, to see so many simply bow down and pay on lawsuits and civil fines, and that's been really discouraging.
Anticipatory obedience has become capitulation nation, hasn't it?
That's been really troublesome to see.
Yeah. So we have about a minute left before I want to go to questions. It may take a little longer for you to answer this, but I cannot come to Arizona, speaking of this administration, without asking you about Pete Hegseth and Mark Kelly. Did Mark Kelly do anything wrong? Is he right to sue the Department of Defense?
Let me just say, Mark Kelly hasn't done anything that Pete Hegseth hasn't done. Pete Hegseth, if you watch the video, 2016, when he expressed, in my view, appropriate skepticism toward the president,
Right.
said exactly what Mark Kelly said on that video. I would think that as a first cardinal rule in politics, that you shouldn't question the patriotism of somebody who has flown hundreds of combat missions, who has flown and commanded a space carrier for us, and has served admirably in the Senate. I wouldn't question his patriotism. And so I think he'll come out just fine.
All right. Let's use the balance of our time to bring all of you into the conversation. My colleagues have microphones that they're walking around. We're going to try this a little different this time. So let's go ahead. We'll take as many questions as we can. Please ask a question. Don't make a speech.
Sure. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
This is looking suspiciously like the last town hall I had, with the exception of nobody's in a chicken suit, wandering around here.
These people are all very nice.
But it's early.
Yes.
So.
I wanted to go back to a comment you made at the very beginning about Maduro. And you're suggesting that the seizure of him was valid because he was a criminal or a refugee from justice. Aren't you concerned about the possibility that for the precedent that this might set with regard to another country indicting a leader of our country or of one of our allies and then going in and taking that person? For instance, in particular, Putin, why wouldn't he just have someone indict Zelensky and then just run in and pull him into Russia for trial?
Yeah, no, you make a very good point, and that is a concern once you go down that road. But this isn't the first time we've done something like this, and it likely won't be the last. So I do think that you have to weigh that. Those are very real and valid concerns about where this puts you. Maybe that would have tipped the scales about. I'm just saying that you could justify what we did under law enforcement action.
Have one right here.
Going back to the beginning again, when you were talking about the world economy, and you made the comment about the role that Jerome Powell has been playing in quieting the world markets. Regardless of what happens, he will no longer be the head of the Fed in May. What are your thoughts on that, and who might rise and how that might impact the world economy?
Well, that is a concern. I'm hopeful that other members of the Fed will step up, and they like their independence as well, and they'll see that Trump only has 2 more years as well. So I'm hopeful that it's not just Jerome Powell that will stand up. But make no mistake, there's a lot of confidence in Jerome Powell, and boy, it's been just gratifying to see him stand up and say, "I will not bow," and that does help world markets. As soon as we are no longer the world's reserve currency, we're in trouble, big trouble. And I think most of my former colleagues and others know that, because you can carry 40 trillion in debt when you're still the best house in a bad global neighborhood. But when we're no longer the world's reserve currency, or nobody has confidence in the US dollar anymore, then that massive debt that we have really starts to go against us.
Okay. Right over here. Hi.
Hi.
I was wondering, with your experience as an ambassador, how would you advise current ambassadors and team members on how to balance American values and ethics with Trump embassy missions that they might get? And also, how would you advise young people who want to be in the area of public service and how to balance that? Because you can't say no to a president. It's your job as the embassy to do the responsibility. So I was wondering, how would you advise them to balance these types of asks with American ethos?
That's a great question. I was fortunate to be a Republican appointed by a Democrat. That used to happen quite a bit, and vice versa. It hasn't happened much anymore, but I was completely comfortable because, as you say, you represent first the United States of America, but you also represent that administration, and I was completely comfortable with the Biden administration's policy toward the Republic of Turkey. And so that was good for me. I am concerned about where our foreign service is going in general. Typically, there are about 1/3 of ambassadors around the world are political appointees, usually big donors and whatever. That was not me. Sometimes former officials, but usually big donors. And 2/3 are career foreign service officers that have diplomatic experience and expertise country expertise. That is shifting significantly. I think with the latest recall of, I think, 24 career ambassadors.
Within the last week or two,
yes, just in the last couple of weeks, will likely be approaching 50% political. Now, as a political ambassador, I shouldn't be one to complain, but I am really concerned about that. And I admire those in our foreign service, the career officers, and you've seen a rash of retirements, particularly those at the mid-level whose next position would be ambassador, and they see no room, no role, and so they're getting out. And so I'm concerned. But for those looking to get in the field, we'll be back. We are going to need good diplomats. There is no substitute for diplomacy. And your point about U.S. values, I am concerned about if just, transactionalism kind of takes over. Take where I was in Turkey. Right now, the mayor of Istanbul has been jailed because he's the most likely opponent to Erdogan. But we haven't spoken out against that at all. And that concerns me. Our foreign policy has always been imbued with American values. And when it no longer is, we're going to face some hardships going ahead.
All right. Take one in the back. Yes, hi.
Hi. So you talked about executive power growing, right, under the Trump administration. Really, I would say it started with Obama, and each president subsequently has increased executive power, more executive decision or orders. At the same time, Congress has been pretty deficient in its duty to not just checks on the president, but just as a whole. And so one could argue that executive power had to grow in order to fill the gap. And I promise I'll keep this short. The last part is Trump in particular has been deficient in executing the duties of the executive branch, notably in the case of TikTok, which I personally think is one of the more constitutionally problematic things that have happened, which are a law was passed, it has to be executed upon. How do you resolve both of those issues? Like, how do you fix Congress not doing things, and how do you fix Trump not executing the law as it's been passed?
Yeah. President can't just decide, I don't like this law, therefore I'm not going to follow it.
Yeah, the system we have, every president since George Washington, I think, has accumulated maybe a little more power just by virtue of the system we have. It didn't start with Obama, it didn't stop with him. You'll continue to see that. What is bothersome is when you have Congress willingly cede that authority that they have under the Article I, powers, particularly the powers of the purse. And so, I mean, the only thing you could say is the people in the country have to say, we want the people's house, the people's representatives to be our representatives. And so they have to get more serious about electing people who will stand up for the congressional prerogatives. And I have to say, that's what's just been really disappointing lately, is just to see I can say Republicans on my side just stand back and let the president have free reign.
You're still a Republican.
Oh, yes.
And you will stay a Republican.
I will.
You have concerns about the future of your party or the president of your party?
I do. I do. But I do think, like I said, I think there is a migration back to a more traditional role for Republicans. Limited government, economic freedom, strong American leadership abroad, belief in alliances, because grief and anger are not a governing philosophy. Populism only goes so far. You have to govern. And so that's why I'm confident that the party will return. Now, there's some things that are going to be a long time in coming, and I think the president, the greatest damage are the norms that just erode over time. I mean, I just saw on the media just now, the president walking away from a meeting and flipping somebody off.
And mouthing the thing that he was doing to the audience that he was in front of.
I mean, that matters because it gives license, it shouldn't, but to others in the party and other elected officials.
Well, it's a permission structure, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I've been disappointed on the Democratic side to see some people just, return serve on that. And I think we're better than that.
Let's try to take one more before we run out of time. We have one. I know we have one in the front right here if we want, right there.
Oh, sorry.
This gentleman's been very patient. I'm sorry. Sir.
Senator, Ambassador. Quick question on your comment about not being as concerned about the courts, especially given the Supreme Court, the Roberts Court decision on presidential immunity, giving Trump and future presidents almost unbridled power. I think even his own lawyers never thought that had a chance in the courts. And they were just presenting that argument probably because he required them to do that. But then the Roberts Court, among all the other things that it's done in the last few years, which some of us might find a little bit more outrageous than you do apparently, I just wonder how you can be a little not as concerned about what this court might do on lots of other issues that he and his administration continue to promote because they know they have such an advantage with a 6-3 majority.
That'll be our last answer. Yes.
Well, that 6-3 majority doesn't hold for all decisions, and it hasn't. Like I said, election challenges and whatnot, the court has, and I would suggest wait until the court comes out on tariffs. And I think you're likely to see most of, at least a majority with the Democrats, with the so-called liberals on the court. I think you'll see them stand up to the president. So I am more, I wouldn't call it sanguine, but I am not as skeptical as some that the courts are just going to go with whatever the president wants, because I've seen them do differently. And it's not just the Supreme Court. I've seen others that during the first Trump term that he appointed who let's face it, the president didn't know anybody on the lower benches or anything else. He relied on the Federalist Society and others. And in most cases, they promoted good conservative judges who will stand up to the president when they need to.
Okay, we are at time or over time. Please give Ambassador Jeff Flake a big hand. Thank you all very much. Now my colleague Andrea Valdez is going to close us out.
Please welcome Managing Editor at The Atlantic, Andrea Valdez.
I know everybody wants to leave. Just thank you again one more time to everybody that came and spoke tonight.